This video is brought to you by Rocket Money. Stick around to hear more about the special offer they're providing to the entire Upper Echelon community. Okay, after a full weekend of grinding away on Remnant 2, it's time for the review. Well, maybe not review. Tricky situation here, because I enjoy the game as much as I currently do, it's looking like my next main title of sorts. That means a lot of time spent, a lot of knowledge yet to be gained, and maybe even some of the type of content that originally launched this entire channel is on the horizon. I hope. But for now, this isn't actually a review. I guess I shouldn't have called it that. It's more so an impressions video, as the title says, because my actual review of this fantastic game will come way later down the line when I've sunk in hundreds of hours. That being said, I have completed the campaign one time, re-rolled multiple adventures, as well as used multiple different builds and archetypes, so I'm fairly confident when I say that while this may be an impressions video rather than a full-on review, it's not some sort of shallow first impressions, where I don't even know enough to make a comment. Hopefully I've struck the right balance. That's my goal. First things first, this is a sequel, and everyone should probably play the original as well. It's a good game. The original gave me some trouble back in the day when a game-breaking bug prevented me from finishing the campaign not once but twice. However, I'm happy to say no such problems arose in the sequel, other than a few pesky crashes. No filler content here. You respect my time, so I'll respect yours. Remnant 2 is a procedurally generated daisy chain of dungeon segments. I could sit here and describe the campaign, but in reality, everyone's campaign will be significantly different from each other. You will fight different bosses, run different quests, and get different gear, so emphasizing what happened for me is probably the wrong call for this one. Instead, I'll describe what this game really is, which is a platform. For me, the story doesn't matter. I'm not even really going to discuss it because that's not why I play this game or any game similar. But for what it's worth, I did enjoy the parts of it that I saw. It's interesting, decent voice acting, yada yada, there's a twist, oh my gosh, who cares? Get to the gameplay. I don't even recommend playing this game for the story, I recommend playing it for the combat, so yeah, that's the type of video this is going to be. It doesn't have a bad story, but that's just not my focus. Remnant 2 is pretty simple, in reality. At first it seems complicated, and then after a while it just clicks. Near as I can gather, the game is built on a sort of modular system. Each self-contained section of world is drawn from a pool of options, and then within that section there will be bosses, quests, and loot. Basically, the entire game is you going from one segment of procedurally generated linear world to the next, and when you finish that particular chain of segments, you re-roll it and play it again. Simple. On the surface, it may sound boring, right? Just the words may sound boring, but there's a twist. The procedural generation draws from an overarching pool of bosses and quests that each give unique rewards, meaning that as you play through, you'll find a set of gear, trades, mods, etc., obviously, and that equipment, in a sense, is relatively unique compared to everyone else, at least in conjunction it is. Everyone can eventually get all of the gear in the game, but you need to play quite a lot of it before that might happen, which means that players are forced to go through a kind of evolution because of the tools they are given. Alright, before going further, it's time for today's video sponsor, which is Rocket Money. Lately, I've gotten pretty selective on how I actually choose sponsors, so just to simplify things, here are the two main reasons why I'm choosing to recommend Rocket Money. First, they are incredibly supportive of my creative freedom. Some brands aren't, truth be told, for whatever reason, and that's a really big red flag, but with Rocket Money, it's very clear that they stand by their product and have the confidence to let people speak freely. That's pretty big. Second, I use the service myself. I don't use it constantly, but I've used it twice now for 1-month periods to set and test budgetary limits. It was tremendously successful at that, as well as catch some unwanted subscriptions. Again, very successful. It has performed incredibly well, and I'm happy to endorse them as a result. Rocket Money has helped me cancel a few streaming services in particular. It helped me realize that I had a terrible overspend when it came to multiple different websites where I buy stock footage for these videos, but the bottom line is I use the service and it's effective for what it offers. Rocket Money was formerly known as Truebill. It currently has over 3.4 million members, and if you go to rocketmoney.com/UEG, or click the link in the description, of course, you can get started for free. Premium subscriptions come with many, many more features, some of them quite useful in fact, but in a world where all too many products fall short and underdeliver, Rocket Money is not one of those culprits. Make sure to use the link down below if you have any interest at all in their platform, and big thank you to Rocket Money for sponsoring the channel. Remnant 2 is a digital manifestation of the phrase maximize your resources. I played on veteran to begin and quickly upped the difficulty more, but I couldn't break the game. More on that later, I have an example. You start by going through the central campaign, which will be populated with some random areas, events, and locations, but each time you complete one of the main segments, you unlock that segment of world, if you will, as a repeatable randomized dungeon loop, and that's where the replayability comes from. I should add the developers have explicitly stated, and it seems readily apparent that this is either true or at least mostly true, for that matter, that you could play the campaign once and then again without seeing any of the same elements presented throughout. That's obviously incredibly unlikely to ever happen in reality, but For it to even be possible means that they are fundamentally delivering at least twice as much content as you initially see, which is staggering and fantastic. One of the things about most games these days is that you often don't notice when things are done right, you only notice when they're done wrong. That's kind of shitty when you think about it, deeply, but it's true. It was really easy for me, as an example, to not think about this while playing because it's done right, so it didn't pop up in my brain. But now that I need to give impressions of the game, it's probably one of the most important things to bring up. There is always something valuable to find. Always true, no matter what. The draw for a game like this is loot. I mean, maybe not for everyone, but for me it is. It's loot and combat and progression of your character. Basically, make your character stronger and more powerful. That's the core driving factor. Remnant 2 drip feeds this, the progression, the loot, etc., into a perfect tempo, or with a perfect tempo, rather. Without fail, it is consistently almost perfect for the entire time I've played it thus far, with no end in sight. Every single dungeon gives good loot that you want and need. Trait points, trait cards, weapons, mods, even just crafting materials and scrap. You want all of it all the time, because all of it feeds back into a system, an integrated system, of character upgrades that feels more rewarding than almost any other game I've played in recent memory. You will always need scrap, crystals, and trait points. To get them, you generate yourself whatever world segment seems the most fun to you after you've unlocked them, maybe even one where your build in particular can excel, and farm. But while you do, you get even more than that. The build combinations here are incredible, and as you amass an arsenal of rings, archetype engrams, and modifications, you start to realize just how well this game has managed to maximize the scope of content delivered. Remnant 2 fires on all cylinders. It gives you as much as it possibly can at a perfect pace for an extensive period of time based on their usage of procedural generation, which fits really well here, and it does all of this with actual decent balancing. That is rare, and I hope I won't be proven wrong here, but so far I've been unable to break the game. Unable to trivialize the content, and rather than a situation where the player can rapidly fall outside the bracket of what's considered reasonable power fantasy, whether that be because they are too weak or too strong, Remnant 2 seems to flawlessly contain your character in a bracket where your choices matter, but never seem to outpace the world around you. As a kind of off-script example, back when I played Mass Effect Andromeda, there was the Lancer build that I created. This is the type of thing I try to do in games like this, where you take a combination of mechanics, put them together, and then break something. For instance, I was infinitely regenerating huge portions of shield and becoming invincible in that game. But that kind of thing has proven impossible for me in the best way, really, like in a good way, for Remnant 2. So instead of being able to break the game and get way too strong and kill everything easily, I'm actually engaging with the system in a way that feels decisive by the developers. I'm not able to break things and become overpowered. I'm able to engage with it and feel strong, but still feel rewarded like I'm in this creation that they made. I mean, it's really hard to explain, but basically they got the balancing right, and that is an incredibly rare thing to be able to say about a game like this. Want to talk about combat scaling or dynamic levels? That's a hot topic these days. Yeah, this is an example where it works. It usually doesn't. Plenty of games try and fail. It's a really tragic situation when it happens, but Remnant 2 does it properly, and that's worth emphasizing. Really fast rundown of all the different gear systems. Your character has traits, which are cards that can be leveled up to 10, providing unique bonuses. You find them in the world. Everyone starts with one character archetype engram, but there's a dual class system where you can get and equip more of them and switch them around to see what you want. And engrams level outside of the character themselves. That part's kind of important, which I thought was fairly interesting. There are weapons, which are often unique, which have a mod and a mutator. Mutators, like weapons, can be upgraded. There is a relic, which has different options, and relics then have fragments in them, which have even more stats and bonuses, and can also be upgraded. You get 4 rings, an amulet, and armor, which in concert makes this one of the deepest yet somehow relatively well-balanced customization systems imaginable. For reference, I have done a sort of summoner build that spams out tentacles with a certain weapon mod and root monsters that heal me every time they deal damage, along with the dog companion that you get. So like, I'm trying to construct an army of summons for one build, and I've made a raw weapon damage build that chains kills together while forcing itself to never go above 50% health with a certain item, in order to persistently activate a set of bonuses based on missing percentage health. These are just 2 options I made with the limited resources that I had at the time of doing these impressions. I'll be experimenting with many more afterwards and coming up with builds and all different combinations, but combat balancing, progression, consistency of rewards, and customization are all as close to 10 out of 10 as you can possibly get. One thing I do have to acknowledge here, the map kinda sucks. Maybe it was just me who had trouble, but the thing It's kind of a pain to navigate when it's a larger, more complex indoor structure with levels on top of each other. You have to wiggle it just right and figure out what you're even looking at half the time. But that's a really small complaint for me to have in the grand scheme of things, and it almost isn't even worth mentioning. Practically every time I struggled with something, it was because of something I did wrong. Boss fights manage to achieve that perfect balance of this is impossible and unfair when you start out, and bro, I'm amazing at this game when you finally succeed. Normally, that's a very hard balance to achieve for any game at any time, and yet Remnant 2 has succeeded more often than not with individual fights, making it a very satisfying experience to explore the world, even post-campaign when I re-rolled the main story, because any new bosses I encounter, of which there were many, are likely to be interesting, engaging, and rewarding. I've honestly come to respect this game a lot over my time spent playing. It's hard, extremely hard, based on how high you go in the difficulty settings, and you should be testing those limits. The pattern recognition is demanding, again at higher tiers of difficulty. You're expected to use mods and relics effectively, but the sum total of the combat systems here is an extremely satisfying push to be better, but it doesn't feel like a shove in the back that makes you fall down flat on your face. It's just a friendly push, and it works. Co-op is cool. In fact, I'd say the game is almost specifically designed for co-op, but you don't really need to do it if you don't want to. The synergies are great. Co-op feels great, certainly, but as a more solo player, myself in particular, I spent a lot of time in the game by myself, and that felt good too. Remnant is, of course, designed as a Souls-like title, but it's also a bit more friendly, at least, to players who don't necessarily want a full dose of what that genre really is. If you did want a full dose of it, you can make it happen with the difficulty settings, but when I tell you that the game was built to utterly maximize the scope and value of content delivered to the end user, I fully mean it. The game runs pretty well. Like I said, a few crashes, which were a little bit annoying at times, but there weren't that many of them. And some things where stuff didn't load in properly, actually, but a restart fixed that one. But glitches and technical difficulties in general, there's not very much I can harp on. Currently, I'm focusing on some of the harder things to acquire. It's like engrams, archetype engrams, etc. Farming resources, in particular scrap, is becoming hard to come by, so maybe that's not perfectly well balanced, but at the same time, I'm excited to go farm more. And I'm building out an arsenal of character builds, that's probably the most important thing, but the flexibility of what I want to do, where I want to go, or how I want to approach things, as well as the value I expect to find while doing so, hasn't decreased at all, despite being more than a full campaign and a few adventures deep on top of that, with dozens of hours under my belt currently. That is very impressive design. The classes feel really good. They synergize, not just with potential teammates, but within each other for dual archetypes. They have unique roles, and they come across as intentional and polished. The loot feels great, obviously, with no end in sight on that one, and solid balancing, plus the added incentive where the combat is well made, responsive, crisp, forgiving iframes, satisfying, etc., which makes Remnant 2 at the very least, a triple threat, maybe even a quadruple threat. I'm currently losing track of time when I play. It's that enjoyable for me. I look up and an extra hour is gone, while I haven't even gone back to check the 3 new sweet-ass things I just discovered in the latest dungeon, and I'm about to start a new one, and I want to start a new one. I respect what they have made here. I'll be playing it extensively in the coming weeks and doing a much more thorough review later on, but for the final summary, here it is. Remnant 2 has a passable story, incredible combat, satisfying loot, fantastic customization, good level design, and more content than you would ever guess on the surface, given the price tag and first run experience. It's worth buying, categorically worth buying. It's worth playing, for sure, and it's damn close to a 10 out of 10. I don't really give 10 out of 10, but like the past couple of games I've played, I'm sitting here thinking like, well, a 9.5 because I said I don't give 10s? Like, the game is just doing so many things right. You can feel the passion, you can feel the care. It's really solid. I mean, it builds on the foundation. This is going to become a very famous franchise. I mean, there's going to be a Remnant 3, right? They could easily put in a whole bunch of DLC or like modular things to slot into this if they coded it right. I mean, it's a platform. It's a platform for further gameplay where it's very clear that the value is maximized to the players. So again, glowing recommendation. I'm looking forward to playing more of it. If you want to support, there are links down below, merch, social media, the video sponsor, of course. Thank you to Rocket Money again, as well as YouTube alternatives, locals, and Patreon, plus more, but I'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching. Do stay tuned for the actual full review later on. This is more of a, I blitzed through as much content as I could, and now I'm doing an impressions thing, but the really thoughtful kind of analysis-driven review will be later on. But yeah, that's it. Have a nice night.